A very warm welcome to everyone. NPPA welcomes you all to another of its webinar series. For today's webinar, we have a mix of audience with different backgrounds, professions. Some of you are NPPA members and some of you might not be aware of NPPA. So just to give a brief background, NPPA stands for National Positive Psychology Association, which aims to explore positive psychology constructs globally and internationally with respect to teaching and research. The theme of today's webinar is another important topic from both industry and academic. And there's always remains this questions of how to develop a robust psychological test for different purpose. In today's webinar titled Current Trends in Psychological Testing, our honorable speaker, Dr. Mohita Junakar, will be focusing on some of the intricacies of the area of psychological testing. Before proceeding ahead, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce our esteemed speaker for today, Dr. Mohita Junakar. Dr. Mohita is currently working as an associate professor at Jyoti Dalal School of Liberal Arts, NIMS University, Mumbai, and has about 8 years of research experience and 6 years of teaching experience post her PhD. She has done her PhD in cognitive psychology from IIT Bombay and a postdoctoral fellowship from IIT Delhi in psychometrics. Dr. Mohita has also published about 18 papers in national and international peer-reviewed journals in psychometric validation of positive psychology construct and has about 8 book chapters. Her key areas and teaching areas are applied positive psychology, psychometrics, and cognitive psychology. Ma'am has also published 4 co-authored books titled Measures of Positive Psychology, Development and Validation, Death Penalty, Perspective from India and Beyond with Springer, and Maximizing Human Potential Through Behavioral Competency with Bloomsbury. She is also among the founding members of NPPA and is currently serving as an executive committee member. With a rich experience in the field of positive psychology and psychometrics, it is indeed our pleasure to welcome her today. Without taking much time, I would like to introduce the topic on which Dr. Mohita will be speaking today, that is titled Current Trends in Psychological Testing. Just to give a brief about the background of the topic, the history of psychological testing dates back to 2200 BC, and ever since the field has emerged and grown exponentially. Post-World War era, one of the important techniques, that is factor analysis, emerged, which made aptitude and personality testing possible. However, in 2021, we can test and measure most of the human behavior. Yet there remains a pertinent question: are the results of the measurement valid and reliable? And these are some of the questions that Dr. Mohita will be focusing on during her session. Her talk will firstly focus on the different psychometric properties of the test, and secondly, how to establish the same for adaptation and translated version of the psychometric scales. With this, we welcome you, ma'am. Just before I step aside, I have a small request to everyone. Kindly keep your mic on mute, keep your videos off. You can have the chat window to post your questions. We will be happy to take them up. It will be an interactive session. Dr. Mohita will be asking you some questions. You can raise your hands and we will be unmuting you to ask them. So let's begin today's session. Over to you, ma'am. Ma'am, kindly unmute yourself.
Thank you, Kirti, for the introduction, and we would commence. This is one of the topics where a lot of you must be even practicing psychologists and or faculty members or even students who are wanting to look at a career in psychology, and psychometrics has been at a forefront today. But while we look at psychometrics and we want to talk about it in detail, I only have one question for all of you. Uh, do you really think that a paper and pencil test that we by general use is an accurate measure of assessing any individual's, be it mental health or well-being or even personality aspects? Do you think that it is going to be an accurate measure? You would put down your responses in the chat. So while we say that one of the participants just put that they are not accurate, but yet we all are using the scales day in and day out. So what is it that actually we are looking at accuracy then is something what I'm going to take you through and where we are today with respect to accuracy as well. Because a lot of times we do use this paper pencil test without a knowledge of even knowing whether they are accurate enough or not. So right now, just give me a second. Kitty, is the window visible?
Yes, ma'am, your PPT is visible.
Thank you. So while we are looking at testing and we are going to be looking at accuracy levels, all of us know that paper pencil test is not a good measure of actually uh, talking about accuracy levels as well. But then still we all are using it. So what is it that this test are going to become accurate? So the world today, when we are looking at psychological testing, we are actually moving towards the accuracy end. And what is going to be a best possible way to even establish this accuracy? So I'm going to take you down through introduction, the types of measurement which are there. For a new scale, how do we develop adaptation and the translated versions? So by and large, we know that a psychological test has to be standardized, a word that we keep on always using for this. And when we speak of standardization, automatically there are three words that come to our mind. Can anyone tell me what are those three words that often as psychologists we do assess with standardization? I'll just give you about a minute so that you can write down your responses in the chat. So three words that we associate with standardization of a psychological test.
Ma'am, we are already getting few responses.
Hmm?
Some
Can
are
you?
saying reliability, validity, and norms, norms, validity. So
Yes,
reliability, validity, and norms. So these are some of the repetitive responses that we are getting.
they are very accurate enough. Whenever we speak of standardization, we do speak of norms, we speak of reliability and validity. However, today when we are looking at most of a paper and pencil test, we say that norms are again going to be somewhere affected due to the cultural aspects as well. And that is a major reason why when we look at norms, we are saying that you need to be at every stage of research that you want to pick up, a scale that you want to be using, you need to ensure that not essentially those norms which are going to be useful for you need to be re-establishing them. The same thing where we are talking of reliability and validity, we are today considering it to be even established as far as even a construct validity is concerned. So we will look in the process of this talk, why are we looking at the essentialities of this construct validity also to be re-established as the population changes, as the sample size also changes, even within the same country that we are looking at. So while we speak of standardization, we are also looking at objective at them being objective in nature, because at end of it we need numbers to do it, and of course a systematic procedure as well. So while we are saying it is going to be a sample of an individual's mental or behavioral characteristics which are there, which will distinguish that individual from the rest of the individuals also among that set of the population. But while we speak about how we are going to be measuring, it entails two major things, and that is one is going to be a response to the items which are there. So people are going to be responding to the items, and second is going to be a composite score which is going to be emerging after we score all the items together. So for example, if I pick up say mental health of an adolescent, then I could be looking at and using a mental health continuum scale by Keys 2002 version of a short form, which has got three separate parameters and it's a 14 item scale. So of course, to come down to the emotional well-being quotient, I need to add three items together. So that's where we are going to, and then of course we will also add all the 14 items together to get a composite score. So that is exactly where we are saying that how are we going to be distinguishing? So one is people will be putting a tick mark on a series of statements, and second is going to be a composite score which will emerge from those responses. So when we are looking at it, it is going to be assessing a lot of psychological constructs. Earlier we were looking at aptitude and personality testing, but today we are looking at mental health, we are looking at well-being, we are looking at resilience, grit, any kind of a psychological construct today we pick up, apart from self-concept, self-esteem, self-awareness, emotional intelligence. All of these are getting, all of these constructs are being measured as well, as much as even metacognition as a construct within cognitive psychology. So that's where we are talking of that these series of items which are there, they are going to be actually assessing a plethora of the psychological constructs at all points of time. The technical term, a lot of times we use the word as psychological testing, but the actual term behind it is psychometrics, which is actually a blend where you're looking of statistics coming in, and of course you have the psychological theoretical framework, so you're looking at a convergence of psychological constructs with a little bit of statistics angle to it, and that's where we have the psychometrics as a word coming in, and that's actually a technical word that globally we also are using. So we are saying that what is the psychometrics all about? It's going to be concerned, so which is going to be looking at measurement of, it could be knowledge, it could be a theory in psychology, abilities, attitudes, personality traits, or even an educational measurement which is there. So it's going to be concerned with a theory as well as a technique to be measuring any of the psychological constructs. So why are we talking of a theory? Because every scale, if we actually go to see that we are using, it's based on one of the theoretical premises. It will always have a theoretical rationale from where a scale has been derived, and it's very important for us to understand today as to why are we selecting a particular scale, and why are we possibly rejecting some other type of a scale also. We need to know that how is a screening test going to be different from a diagnostic test, because a lot of times we pick up one scale for all and we think it's going to be applicable, but that's not how it is any longer. We are having distinctions, and these distinctions need to be even at all points of time. When you're going to be undertaking research, we need to adhere to them as well. So one is that when we are looking at psychometric properties, and where we were just talking about standardization, we did a lot of you did speak of norms, validity, and reliability. Now what is most important when we look at psychometrics more than norms is validity and reliability as two important pillars that are there. Because when we are going to be looking at validity and reliability, that is going to be giving us almost a near to accuracy measures which are there. There are a lot of scales today which have undergone rigorous validity and reliability. Statistical parameters have been met very rigorously. Those scales today, irrespective of the culture, irrespective of the country that we are in, they have stood their ground still. Okay, so there has been barely any researcher who has come up with a claim today to say that look, this scale is not stable enough, or this scale is not consistent enough. those kind of questions have not been ever raised for certain scales. Whereas on other hand, there are a lot of scales also where there is a consistency, and the stability of these scales has been always questioned, but yet they have only been emerging again and again with newer reliability and validity parameters which are there. And I am going to be talking a lot more in detail with reliability and validity because there is a lot of statistics which is also involved, and for every sub dimension or a sub you could say type of reliability or validity, there is a separate type of statistics which is actually there. Now, which when we look at validity, while we'll see in the next slide, I'll tell you which one we consider is the best. While talking of reliability, we all know that it is a measurement of consistency of a test, and that can be either internal consistency or it could be even external consistency. So for example, when we talk of test retest, which is nothing but at different points of time with the same people we are going to be doing. So say for example, today with group A, I have given them the scale of say mental health continuum. The same people after 15 days, after 1 month, after 1.5 months, maybe after every 15 days for up to 2 months, I'm going to be giving them that scale 2 times or 3 times. And then I will come down and check their not only internal consistency but also see the correlation between the different time periods which are there. So the moment you come down and you look at the different time periods that are there, that is where we will be using correlation for T1, T2, T3, and we want to look at it really whether there has been a consistency of the scores or not. If it is going to be similar, then of course we would get a significant and almost near to one as a correlation also between the two scores which are there. However, if it is not going to be so, then of course we need to be looking at the internal consistency again. A lot of times we need to check reliability for the sample on whom we are collecting our data, because in my experience also a lot of times I've seen there could be one item which either contributes too high towards the internal consistency, the weight is too high or it is too low, and hence we need to be actually looking at that internal consistency scores also which are there, because the problem which comes up is if one item is going to be heavily contributing, then definitely we will have problems in coming down to the conclusions of our results also for the other sample, when we are saying that really whether are people mentally healthy, whether they are flourishing or languishing, we cannot make accurate conclusions from the data set. So it is very essential that we need to be looking at this internal consistency, whether we are doing test retest iterator or even a parallel form. So internal consistency is an internal, as the name goes about it. Now this is going to be denoted by what we see in all the research papers called as alpha, and you have a sign of alpha which comes up. So that's one thing. So Cronbach alpha is a statistical measure for defining the internal consistency which is there. Then inter-rater is nothing but different people are going to be there, but it's going to be the same test. So different people will take the same test, and you will want to correlate the test scores of both the sets of people who are there, and that will give an inter-rater reliability. Parallel form is a lot of times where you have different people at the same time they're going to be taking the test, but it will be different tests. So you could have two forms which are there, where you're talking of you would have a parallel form A and a parallel form B, and then there are going to be actually different items totally written in the test, and they could be different. There are going to be, of course, different individuals who are going to be rating both the forms, and but at the same point of time, and you would want to correlate them and see. Another one which is not on the slide, but a lot of times we do it with large data sets is called as a split half reliability. So either you can split them on basis of gender. If you've got equal number of men and women, you could split it. You could be splitting it as odd and even, or you could just randomly split them into any two groups, and you could check for the reliability also. However, when we are looking at establishing or constructing a new scale, reliability or the consistency becomes a first pillar. And even before we move to calculating or seeing the Cronbach alpha, what we also see is the contribution of mean, standard deviation, skewness, and kurtosis for each item, which are the measures of central tendency and dispersion. So all of them will be checked for to ensure that no one item is going to be contributing towards a high coefficient of Cronbach alpha. So that's one thing where we are looking at. For any scale, we say that a Cronbach alpha of about 0.60 is going to be excellent and it's going to be very good. However, there is also another set of researchers who do criticize that when you are going to be having a Cronbach alpha, which is almost 0.98, 0.99, even that gets questioned, which means that the items have a lot of orthogonality, which means they are almost similar items. There is not going to be any difference when you're going to be asking the question or the items to the people, and hence their responses are going to be staying the same. There is another reason for it is where you would get very high is most of your items are towards social desirability, which means they make the people attempt or answer those questions in such a way that it will give you a very high internal consistency as well. So that is one of the checkpoints also for us to see how our items are being placed as well. The second one is, and the most important, more than even reliability, as a psychometrician myself, I would say is validity. If a test is valid, then definitely reliability will be taken care of. So I would like to give you one example here of a test which most of you will be familiar with, is called as a strengths and difficulties questionnaire, which was developed by Goodman et al. And it's been a scale around for a lot of time. It measures on 4 difficulty score and one is a pro-social behavior score. So it's technically, when we look at from a psychometric perspective, we say that it is not a two-factor model, but it is a five-factor model, because the items are going to be eventually giving you 5 sets of sub-scores which are there. However, when this test was, or this test has been tested for its psychometric properties, specifically its validity, uh, unfortunately there are very few studies globally. Very few is like, if you have 10 studies, you'll find barely 2 studies which come up with a 5-factor solution. But otherwise, what is actually available, or what is really, you could say globally, what people can establish a validity for this test is a 2-factor validity, which is a difficulty score and a pro-social behavior score. So we really are not able to establish or distinguish it amongst the 4 different sub factors of the difficulty scores that actually come up with. So this test is reliable. Strengths and difficulties test is definitely a reliable test, but we are not able to establish the validity of the test. So that's why we always say that it is validity which subsumes reliability, which means that validity will take care of the reliability itself. So why are we looking at it? The major factor in validity that today we are wanting to establish, or the world is looking to establish, and which is the closest next to accuracy, is the construct validity. So construct validity is nothing but it will measure the concept as it is being hypothesized. So for example, if I'm saying that my new test of Vikaras has to measure these only 5 Vikaras which are there, and I make up the statements for those 5 Vikaras, then definitely my test has to be measuring it. So whatever I am hypothesizing, the test needs to be actually measuring that, and that's a construct validity. Now, to establish construct validity, the statistical test that we perform is a confirmatory factor analysis, which is an extension of the structural equation modeling. So it is what happens in a general structural equation modeling that a lot of times as organizational psychologists also do undertake to look at impact of different factors at workplace. We are looking at models which would emerge with a lot of different factors which are there, and you would want to change your paths and just see if it converges or not. Over here, it is not just taking into account a path, but here the paths are very fixed when we are looking at construct validity. So either it will converge or it will not converge. You cannot be changing the path of what you have hypothesized. Okay, so where we are looking at it, we are saying that before we even move to the construct validity, a lot of times you could be doing even an exploratory factor analysis in case of a new test that we are going to see. So if we are going to do a new test, then definitely exploratory factor analysis will be undergone. But in case of an existing scale which is there, and when you will do a confirmatory factor analysis, all the softwares will let you know whether which path is the weakest, or which of the beta weights is going to be the weakest, and which is going to be which is going to be an acceptable beta weight for us to even consider that item. So here when we come down to, we are going to be looking at path to each item which is there, and it takes into account two concepts statistically. One is called as observed variables, and another one is called as an unobserved variables. Now all our psychological tests which are there, they always have this concept of observed variable and unobserved variable. Say for example, all of you would be familiar with personality testing. So let's take the big five as one of the test which is there. Now when we are talking of the big five, we know that if I'm wanting to look at openness, there will be certain items, say 5 items or 10 items from a 60 item test which are there, which will be converging to the to openness as one of the constructs. Now what is happening is only these 5 items are contributing towards openness. So openness statistically is an unobserved variable. I, as a statistician, I'm giving it a name called as openness, and I'm saying that these 5 variables or these 5 measurements that I have, they are all going to be 5 of them will converge together to a particular unobserved variable, which is called as which is going to be called as, say, openness. Okay, so that is a major difference when we are looking at a confirmatory factor analysis and a regular SEM path which is there. So here we are talking about a path analysis where we want to look at how do the observed measurements really fit onto an unobserved variable? And is there an association also between the unobserved variables or not? So that is also another thing that we want to test, where we speak about, say, the correlation between the sub dimensions of a scale. So when we are looking at big five, we know that there is openness, conscientiousness, agreeableness, neuroticism, and extraversion as categories. So we want to look at, is there a correlation between these five sub dimensions of personality or not? So that is something where we are talking of a construct validity. Today, it has become of an immense importance that we actually measure the construct validity. Earlier were the times before 2010, I would say, where the construct validity was really not being given a lot of emphasis on. But as there has been a lot of technological advancement, a lot of we have softwares which are today available. Establishing construct validity is now becoming almost a norm in 2021. So if we are looking at publishing a paper in a good indexed journal, a good impact factor journal, then of course reporting the construct validity gives an advantage towards publication as well. Of course, there are two separate types of even the construct validity which are there, which have been used a lot in the past as convergent and discriminant validity. So for example, if I have a scale of mental health and I have another scale on well-being, since they are theoretically addressing the same aspect, we are going to be having a convergent validity. So they will be going in a same direction, construct wise or concept wise. Discriminant is where I take up a mental health scale. I have a positive mental health scale and I pick up a depression, stress, anxiety, say a DAS 21 scale with it. Now, these are two highly distinguishing concepts or constructs, and hence the correlation that I would get is it has to be a negative correlation. It cannot be going on the same path. So when we want to actually establish convergent or discriminant validity, we do it through correlation. Now a lot of times these days we also report correlation between mental health, positive mental health, and depression, or positive mental health and other distress scales which are there. So it has become almost like almost everyone wants to establish a convergent or a discriminant validity. Again, we are really not a lot of psychometricians will not really go with convergent and discriminant validity, because this comes at a step 2. So still establishing the construct validity through a confirmatory factor analysis stands to be the highest benchmark when it comes to any kind of establishing of psychometric properties or accepting or rejecting results of any research study as well. Content validity, which is there, is generally established during the very first initial steps of test construction itself, where we speak of expert reviews. So that is where we establish it. So whether we want to call it a representative validity or even a face validity, that it's commonly known as that, yes, my scale has a face validity. Now a lot of times even face validity or content validity which is there, we can establish it through a basic Cronbach's, sorry, not Cronbach's, through correlation of Carl Pearson. So you could have an R value to it and just see, because you could have 5 or 6 raters or 7 raters whom you have given, experts you have given the test for evaluation to them with respect to the relevance, and you could be getting a score and you could see if there is any correlation between the scores that each individual has even given for every item. So that's one thing where you could be possibly wanting to look at the correlation over there. Then, of course, is a criterion validity which is there. Now, these will correspond to a different test of the same construct where we want to look at, concurrent validity or even a predictive validity. A lot of times these days, you have predictive validity which is also inbuilt within the test. One of the examples of this is WHO's quality of life brief scale, which is there, where you have it's a 26 item scale with two items that are independent, and those are actually measuring your overall life satisfaction and your overall levels of happiness which are there. So where you're looking at it, that is going to be a predictor where we are talking of the kind of people have perception about the environmental conditions, the psychological well-being, their social environment, and the physical health as well. So that's where we are talking of the predictive validity being inbuilt within the test also. So a lot of times these validities are there. However, we need to be dwelling furthermore on those also. So in the research papers we come to is how do we really see these, or how can you be identifying as an individual where really have they addressed all of these types of reliability and validity, and even whether you would want to accept the results of that paper or not as a researcher. So that's why I've just put on two examples which are there. So first I'm going to talk about an example which you could be seeing on your screen on the left hand, which speaks of maternal mental health. This is a 2021 paper, recent paper, which speaks of maternal mental health during COVID-19 lockdown in China, Italy, and Netherlands. It's a cross validation study. So what they have done is that they have assessed mental health through a brief symptom inventory, which was an 18 item inventory. And they had so you have the details which they have mentioned, the authors, and then they also go on talking about the correlation, which is the inter subset correlation which is there. So if we go to see, they are talking of somatization, depression, and anxiety, as well as PTSD. So they've got four different dimensions over here, and they have seen for all those four dimensions, are they being correlated or not? And as they have reported that yes, there is a correlation within the scale itself, within all the sub factors of the scale also, which ranges from 0.78 to almost perfect one, which that's why they have given it as 0.961, because generally when we get these kind of almost perfect correlations which are there, there is a question mark which gets at times raised also for that particular dimension. So where they have done this, they have also given in just one line, if you could see that confirmatory factor analysis has supported this decision by indicating one general psychopathology factor. So why are they talking about one latent is because they have put on all those 27 items which are there onto one latent item or one latent variable itself, so which is nothing but a one factor solution. So they are only talking of it as a brief symptom inventory. They are not talking here of this inventory of being a four factor solution. If that would have been the case, then they would have reported it as that those all of those items which were there, they have been put on a they would have been putting it on four factors very independently, but here they are talking of just a correlation between the four factors is being explained by one general pathology factor as well. So that is the reason why we need to understand the factor solution which comes up at the end of it, that there is one general psychopathology factor, because they are saying that all those four dimensions which were there, they are being very highly correlated also, and that's how it is getting explained through the structure. So that's why they give the indicators as RMSCA, CFI, SRMR, which is there. So there are a lot of indices. There are about 12, 10 to 12 indices that we look at when we consider of confirmatory factor analysis. But the most general ones for accepting or rejecting any construct validity are these three, where we speak of RMSCA, CFI, and SRMR. So generally, SRMR is also the root square mean rationalization, is not something that we always were considering earlier, but today reporting SRMR has become somewhat mandatory. The cutoffs for all of these indices which are there, they have been statistically standardized indices, though there are still differences as to, not with respect to the cutoff, but what is going to be the best combination of indices that one needs to be using. So general thumb rule that everyone follows is that you should have minimum 3 out of those 10 or 12 indices which are going nearing to your cutoff point, or which are above the cutoff points, then you could be considering those three indices itself. Again, if you go to see here, they have given why are we talking of it as one factor solution. Again, is the kind of reliability that they have reported, which is 0.96, and it's just one score, which means it's for one factor itself. They are not giving us a reliability scores for all the four factors also. So which means that they know that even if these four factors are there, items are converging. The four sub factors are are so highly correlated, where we could even find correlation up to 0.96, which is almost a perfect correlation, tending towards a perfect correlation. um, that if these items, if you have to put it on four, then you could have them actually giving you different pathways as well. So to avoid this kind of factors changing, they could go from post traumatic stress disorder to anxiety, or somatization or depression, or from depression items moving to PTSD and so on. For these things to be avoided, a lot of times when we go for revalidation of the scales, we put them on to the parent factor itself. We will not consider the sub dimensions, and in that's the case where we also then report only a single reliability score itself. We will not report the separate reliability scores. Now I move on to the one which is on the right hand side, which you would find as a personal well-being index for school children. Now, a lot of times what happens is that we pick up scales which are there, which have been standardized in on the same population, and we want to write it in, say, another research paper altogether. If that is the case, then there is nothing wrong in including the psychometric properties just in a sentence when we are going to be describing the measure itself. So you're like, you can find that they actually report that what was even the Cronbach alpha in two research papers, which was say 0.82, and further on the authors also say that it was validated in India and found to be psychometrically sound with Cronbach's alpha of 0.74, and then the confirmatory factor analysis results were also acceptable. Now, here, if you go to see, though RMSEA is too high, which is again acceptable, so we find that RMSEA should be lower the better. So it has to move from between 1 to 0.5, and lower it going towards 0.5 is going to be a good cutoff for RMSEA. So we are talking talking of that, we have a CFI which has to be above zero point 0.9. So again, that is something which is also acceptable in that terms out here. So where we are talking about the GFI, which is again even in the acceptable range itself. So they just say that it is acceptable, because if RMSEA was going to be lower than point, or it's going to be somewhere less than 0.05, then it would be a very good fit. So 0.09 is considered to be like a mediocre fit itself. So we are not looking at it as, we are not saying that the scale has to be rejected, but then it's not also one of the most excellent scales, you could say, which is being used for the Indian school children. So this is how you will find currently in research papers that even in one liner in the measures section, the indices for the construct validity will be there. So whenever you find these kind of indices which are there, they are going to be indicating that the construct validity of the scale was actually being established. Now, this is what you find in the methodology section. So we move on to even, there are a lot of tables and figures that you would be seeing these days in papers, especially the figure that is being indicated on the right hand side where we have, and on the left hand side there is a table. Now it's for the same thing that the table is. So today no longer are we looking at construct validity for only a group of sample, but we have moved on in construct validity where we want to establish it for two groups also. So I can have the construct validity independently being calculated for the adolescents, a construct validity being independently calculated for the adults, and after that, what I really want to do as a layperson is subtract the two from each other, and I should get a zero, right? Because they are the same thing. So if it's one for adults and it's one for adolescents, when I subtract both, it will be a zero. So that is exactly what we are talking for as a multi-group CFA that is being done today, where we want to look at a difference in both of them. So while we speak of, say, for example, there are a lot of scales in positive psychology which give you a very large breadth of age gap, which says 18 and above. So right away from an 18-year-old kid to an 80-year-old man also you could be giving it, and it's being claimed that these structures or these scales are reliable and valid enough to be using. So that's where this question always was being raised by a lot of psychometricians to find out that really is it going to be accurate enough. The accuracy was in question, and that is when we realize that there has to be another statistical test which needs to be brought up for scales like these specifically. And these are called as, when we talk of multi-group CFA, statistically we call it off as a measurement invariance. There are different types of measurement invariances which are going to be determined by the kind of test that you have at hand. So here you could find that it was being done to understand the well-being as a model itself. So you have Diner, who is given two scales for well-being, for primarily subjective well-being, where we speak of flourishing as well as positive and negative emotions, which are there. So he gives you Spain, which is a scale of positive and negative emotion experiences, and flourishing as another scale. So what this paper actually did was it did the construct validity for the entire well-being model, because what the paper went on to, what the construct actually says is that when we speak of subjective well-being, it has got two aspects to it. One is presence of positive experiences, absence of negative experiences, and there is going to be happiness also. So there are three sub constructs to this entire concept of subjective well-being. So this one was being measured through two scales, and we wanted to see if really these two scales make up a model of subjective well-being or not. And that is what was being explored in this research paper, where it was actually observed that yes, it made one model of subjective well-being for the adolescents and adults. So the next step was to actually test it and to see it if it will also hold true for the entire age gap of 18 plus. And that's where the multi-group CFA came into the picture. And what you can see on the right hand side is actually the multi-group CFA, which is going to be talking about, which actually gives you an idea about how they are being even correlated and how these constructs are even positive, that it makes one model of subjective well-being itself. So where you can see that flourishing to the negative experiences is negatively correlated, and you also find that the positive to the negative experiences are negatively correlated. However, happiness or flourishing to the positive experiences is being positively correlated. So definitely we know that even hypothetically, this is what we would want to be looking at. Similarly, it also gives you the strength or the correlation for every item to the from the observed variable to the unobserved variable, what is its contributing weight or its contributing beta weight for every item. So that is where we really find that this kind of construct validity speaks a lot about the stability of that particular test as well. So where we you can find in the table how the acceptable levels have been given, because not every statistical parameter which is there has been given by one individual, but it has been given by different individuals altogether. So that is the reason why when we look at it, that different indices based on who has coined it and when have they been coined are actually being used even to accept or reject the model. Similarly, when you will find when we speak of a correlation which is there, intercorrelation, we can also be having a paper where we are talking about, the two different scales itself. Now, here when we are looking at it, we are speaking of a convergent validity, where we are speaking of the subjective well-being that we just saw above as having three different components which are there, which was flourishing, positive experiences and negative experiences. Of course, they also speak about, Diner did speak about a balanced experience also, where you could be subtracting the positive from the negative scores and getting a balanced score as well. But when we are going to be doing a construct validity, we will not take the balance score into account, because statistically it will be cancelling the effects of the positive and the negative experiences onto the latent variable or the unobserved variable which is there. So whenever we are actually picking it up, we do not take the total scores, or we will not be taking anything which is going to be, when you get a final score or a total of certain items and then you are going to be reworking on the total of that, we will not be taking those into account, because they will have statistically certain cancelling effects onto the unobserved variables which are there. And that is the reason why, if I'll just change the screen to this thing where we are looking at the construct validity, you will find that we are not talking of Spain B here. Whereas when we are going to look at a correlation, we can definitely include Spain B in it as well. So when this table is given, a lot of times today, if in the research paper you have not incorporated the reliability score in the description of the measurement itself, then you can also put it like in where you have one coming in for the bivariate correlation matrix. Over there itself, we can put in parentheses or in brackets the um, the reliability scores, which is a Cronbach alpha score itself. If you don't want to put it in parentheses, you can also italicize it. So it will again depend even on the journal to journal. Some of them prefer to put it in parentheses. Someone will ask you to italicize it. But essentially, both of it means that they have established either the convergent or the discriminant validity, and they have also established the reliability of that particular scale itself. Now, when we are going to be looking at new scale, I have just put it in a very nutshell out here, where we are talking of the steps of test construction, a psychometric property that we really want to be establishing, and the statistical tests that we do use also for establishing it. Now, when we look at a new scale, there are two or three ways in which we would want to identify. Of course, the primary purpose of the test construction is why do you want to do it? Today, there are so many scales available. So, a lot of times, the question that we ask is what is the need to make a new scale? Why? Is there a need to make it? Is there a new theoretical framework that you have identified and there is no scale to assess it? Or was it, what is the main aim to even construct it? Or is it that there is no valid scale on the topic of investigation altogether? Then is also to identify the behavior which will be representing that construct. It is very important that first is why should you do it and what is it that you want to even measure that is not being measured till now. Then is preparation of test specifications or the items. Now, when we do items, there are two primary things that can be done. One is the very traditional westernized approach that we always have had, to be picking up the existing scales and the items from those scales and then make a pool out of it, and then you could be moving on to creating that, constructing the pool of items. The second one is whereby you would want to review the construct itself, looking at the different definitions of constructs. Now, this is coming handy. The second approach is actually being done by Dr. Kamlesh Singh from IIT Delhi a lot. She has established scales on vikaras and gunas also that are there. So in that, what the methodology being followed is you would be reviewing the different scriptures which are already there. So whether you could be finding, so what does growth mean in Upanishads? What does growth mean in our Vedas? What does growth mean in Bhagavad Gita? And then based on the meaning of the word growth, you actually construct the items which are there. So the item construction will be based on the definition itself. So this is another way in which you could be writing the items as well. Once the items have been written, they definitely need to be given to different experts in the field. And generally, what we follow as a norm is that you should have it on a 4-point Likert scale. So you could be talking of giving them as most relevant, relevant, somewhat irrelevant to highly irrelevant. So you could just say most relevant, relevant, irrelevant, and high and most irrelevant, and then they have to put a tick mark and send it across. Now you could give it for relevance, you could give it for language. These are the two things that primarily, when we look at face validity, we do it for. And all that you have to do is only the items which you could have 4 or 5 reviewers and calculate the mean and standard deviation for each of the item, the rating that they have given for each of the item. And only items which will have a mean about 3 are the ones you would consider. A mean lower than 3 means that you have to review those items. If it is really a mean towards 1, which means a lot of them have given a rating of irrelevant, then you really need to discard that item. in my own personal experience, I've seen that, as researchers, we also have a lot of affinity for something when we are developing. So we do keep that item, which, might be the experts have said is irrelevant. But as you progress statistically, when you do exploratory factor analysis, you will do confirmatory factor analysis, that item will by default get deleted in the future. So, a lot of times this has happened, where I've always thought, oh no, I don't, after I have examined my scale, I feel, no, no, this item has to be there, how can it go? It's so important for me to assess the construct. And subsequently, yes, in a lot of different steps of test construction, I've seen somewhere or the other, if that item has been going from the first stage, it will continue to actually get filtered out till the last stage as well. So of course you have to review the items. Then once these items have been reviewed by the experts, you have to do a pilot test where, so till the face validity, we were only looking at measures of central tendency. But then once we come to the pilot test on about 50 people done as a test for content validity, we would be looking at skewness and kurtosis, which are the measures of dispersion. So we want to look at the peakedness and the spread of the items as well. Now, at this stage also, there will be items which will get deleted, they will get modified, and then there is going to be a large sample size. A lot of times people ask a question, that is, how do you determine a large sample size? So there's a very simple rule which is there. When we consider exploratory factor analysis, we always say a sample size has to be, ideally it is one item. So for one item, you should have 10 responses, which is an ideal figure. However, once the data set is going to start tending from above 200 responses in totality, then for EFA, it is considered to be a large data set. So anything above 200 is good enough to run an exploratory factor analysis. And that's how you would call it as a large sample size. Similarly, for confirmatory factor analysis, thumb rule of one item, 10 responses is the ideal. However, for running a confirmatory factor analysis, we need a slightly larger sample. You need a minimum of 300 to 400 as a sample size to even run the basic confirmatory factor analysis. So that's the base number to even start off with a confirmatory factor analysis. So that's where we do this entire field test, which is there. Of course, at that time, we want to look at internal consistency, which is the Cronbach alpha as well. We need to be looking at the construct validity, if possible, even a convergent or a discriminant validity as well. So like what I just showed you a previous table where we were looking at a mental health scale and the subjective well-being, it's good to also have a correlational analysis like that. And then finally is to develop the guidelines for administration, scoring, and interpretation of test scores. Uh, Another thing at field test of items these days, it's easier to collect a data of 1,000 people at one point of time rather than going with 200 first, then modifying, then going with another 500 later. So what generally is being done these days is you collect a data on say 1,000 people, and then you split it into 1/3 and 2/3, which is done. On the 1/3 of the data set, you run an EFA, and on the rest 2/3 of the data set, you run the CFA. If there is still, you have say about 600 people for EFA, then you can establish the EFA by splitting this data even gender wise on males and females separately. You run two and you find out a common EFA model. If you're able to find something like this, then definitely the subsequent CFA analysis which is there, that will converge into a model for sure. So if the EFA, while you're going to be doing, you're going to do it as robust statistically as possible, then definitely the subsequent CFA will converge for a new scale. However, if you have been very lenient enough while doing the CFA, you haven't followed any kind of stricter norms for running the EFA analysis, spend a lot of time in running the EFA analysis. It can take anywhere up to even 3 to 4 months, though it is a day's job. But a lot of times what happens is, once you run a model, then you actually let it to hibernate by itself and you return to it after 10 days, 15 days, and you start afresh. So every time you start with it, you're going to be thinking in a different direction. You would have read up a little bit more on the construct, so that will also affect in the meanwhile how you evaluate every item that you have written. So a lot of times it's seen that the EFA model which emerges, after a few days, and when you evaluate day wise EFA models that you have run, it almost takes about 6 months of actual time to come down to one EFA model. So it's not something which should be done in one day. You get one and you accept it as it is. No, as in how you progress onto it. Day one, if item 2 is getting deleted, you delete it. But on day 15th, you feel, let me just retain item 2 and let me delete item 4 first and see. So it will also depend on which item at what point of time you're deleting. So even that will still change the nature of the emerging factor analysis which comes up. And that is the reason why it should be given a lot of time. If EFA is for a new scale, you have spent good amount of time and done it robustly, then nothing can stop you from getting a good CFA model in the first go itself. But if the EFA has been weak, has been poor, has not been done robustly, then definitely getting a good robust CFA model or an acceptable model will be a problem. Then we are looking for adaptation of scales. A lot of times we feel that scales are not culture fair. We want to revise the items of the scales also. It is perfectly fine because, like I said, there is no need to always come up with a new scale. But while we do adaptation again, we need to look at the content validity. We need to be establishing the EFA and the CFA along with correlational analysis again for it. So all the steps from the pilot test itself stay the same. In adaptation, all that you would be doing is you would want to change the language. You might want to change one or two items. They might not be culturally relevant and hence you would want to delete them as well. So that is there. And if there be a need, you could be revising the norms as well. Then we come down as to the translated scales. A lot of times we face this challenge in India where we have the scales in English, but the population we want to test is either it could be Hindi, Kannada, Marathi, Tamil, Telugu, Udiya, it could be Assamese, and we don't have a version in that language with us. Or there could be an existing that language version, but but the author has not established the psychometric properties. Now it could be either way around. So when we are looking at it, if it is the first time you are the pioneer to translate a scale, then definitely once you translate the scale, you need to establish the face validity and the content validity of that scale. So you will send it to an expert who is good with both the languages and also is going to be very good and who understands the construct as well a little bit. So at least has to have a background in psychology and well versed with both the languages as well. So then that person is going to be rating it primarily for language. Now, once they have rated for language, you have seen for the mean and standard deviation, you find that it is good enough, then you will want to back translate it, which means you pick up the translated version. Say I am making it from English to Marathi. Now then I will pick up the Marathi version and back translate it to English and I will match it for its nearly closeness which is there. When we back translated, either the same person can do it, But in an ideal situation, we say that you give the translated version to completely an unknown person to back translate it, and then the researcher can see the near closeness of it. If there is a complete closeness, then you need not go to the step one of translation. But if there is not going to be a near closeness to it, then definitely you need to revisit the step one where you translated it from English to Marathi. So this is a very important step of translation and back translation. The authors, if they are well versed in both the languages, good enough, they could be doing it. If the authors are not well versed, then they could be taking help of someone else who's well versed with both the languages. Again, after that, also the way that establishing the reliability and the validity is, it will still stay the same. So that's not going to change by any means, whether we are looking at new scale, we are looking at an adapted scale or a translated scale. When right away from pilot test onwards, the steps do remain the same. What changes is the way that we will be establishing the face validity or the content validity, but the construct validity, which is the major determinant of accuracy, will not change no matter what kind of scale we are looking at. Okay, so with this, I would end and now keep the floor open for any questions that you have. So Kirti will take it forward from here. So she's going to become the facilitator with respect to any questions that you would be having.
Thank you, ma'am. It was really a wonderful session focusing on different aspects of psychological testing, ranging from steps, or whether we were talking about different how to adapt and how to translate the psychometric scales. So now the floor is open for questions and questions. So you can post your questions in the chat. We can take up those questions. So so as they're posting up questions, ma'am, I would like to take this opportunity to ask one of the questions myself. And so there's this question that since I'm also working on testing, and there was this doubt that I really wanted to ask. Uh, so if a test has a high reliability, like Cronbach reliability, as you were discussing about like 0.99, 0.98 or 0.97, and you said that it is because either the items are too similar, or either they reflect social desirability. So what is how are some of the ways that we can modify those items so that we don't have that high Cronbach alpha? So what are some of the methods that we can rectify?
So what happens is you cannot rectify the item once you have collected the data. So the best is to actually delete that item at one point of time from the analysis and see if you get the still the score as acceptable, which is about 0.6. Then best is to actually remove off that item because it's going to be contributing a lot. Similarly, you could have an item on the other continuum that it will lower your reliability. So when you run this reliability in SPSS, when you do the reliability analysis and you go to options, there is one thing which you find is called as inter item reliability. So it will give you an inter item correlation as an option. So you click on inter item correlation and it will give you the scores which are there. So that is one where we are looking at, how you could be possibly finding out that what is the contribution of every item towards the reliability. Once you know that and you find that rest all are 0.77777, one is only coming 0.9, then you remove that 0.9 and you still see what is going to be the internal consistency. because ultimately if you see, it is nothing but alpha is equal to beta 1 plus beta 2 plus beta 3. So every beta weight or every coefficient which is going to be given by every item, it's just going to be added and divided by the number of total items which were there. It's that simple as a maths. So when you're looking at it, we need to understand that if there is one high contributor or a lower contributor than zero point 0.6, we need to remove that item and see where does this reliability calculation go. If it is coming then zero point 0.6, good enough. Best is to remove that contributor, because this is all happening after you've collected the data. So there is no scope where you could, possibly change the wordings of that item also at a later point of time.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. I actually got a clarity about this. So let me just look at the chat window and see if we have. Yes, so we have a question. Any reliable psychometric test that we can apply to people at crime scenes and traumatic scenes to measure their fright response and immediate psychological bewilderment? How can we check its reliability and validity?
So when you're looking at a crime scene, there is, let Pavitra let you know that there is nothing which you could use then and there. There is only one thing that a lot of times people do use is called as a mental health screening test, which are there. There are a lot of them which you could be using on the spot itself, and that is only to eliminate if the person has got any other kind of mental health illness, but you cannot be assessing their post traumatic disorders, PTSD or anything at that point of time immediately after the crime or at the place of the crime scene itself. Okay, so there is nothing where you could be using any of these measures to look at how scared they are, or whether they have any memory of the crime that they have seen. There are no scales which really measure these situations also.
Participants can raise their hand if they have any questions. We can unmute you and then you can ask your question. So Shilpa has a question. Yes, Shilpa, you can unmute yourself.
Hello, ma'am. Thank you so much for such a detailed and elaborate presentation. So, ma'am, I had a question regarding CFA. So, in one of the slides, you had shown a CFA model, and then there was a table where you had shown that for that particular psychological test for adolescents and older people, what was the the characteristic in terms of the different norms, RMSEA, chi-square by DF. So, ma'am, there what I noticed was two parameters were a few parameters were perhaps not as per the norms. So overall, ma'am, will we call that a fair model or a good model? And how do we when do we call a model a fair model, or when do we say that it's just adequate, or when do we say it's good? If a few of the parameters they are not.
Yes. So what you do, Shilpa, like I said, is out of all of the parameters which are there, those 10, 12 parameters which are given, you pick up any three parameters where your cutoff points actually even do meet. Okay. So that is the basic thing, or a criticism that you speak of CFA, that when all parameters still don't meet, the researchers want their models to be accepted. So where we say is that we generally never say that it's a good fit. We generally say that most of our models are a moderate fit, because there will be a parameter or two which will not fit, because ultimately the data is coming from humans, right? So there can be a lot of error which goes in right away from test administration to the test where people are giving responses to data entry to a plethora of them. So until by the time even for statistically the data comes, there has been a lot of error which at times can be removed, at times cannot be taken into account, or you cannot be deleting that error. So that is one part. That's why we always say that you pick up 3 or 4 parameters where your model is going above the cutoff points, and you say that, then it's a moderate fit model. So most of the research papers where you'll read, the researchers will play it safe saying that the model was a moderate fit. They will never use a word it's either moderate or fair. In the rarest of the rare papers, you will find that where they'll say it was a good fit or it was a very good fit as a model. Nobody wants to claim that as well.
Okay, so ma'am, just a last question. So ma'am, what you just said about the fact that we can take up any 3 or 4 parameters. So ma'am, is there any reference for it or research paper for it when we are writing and we are just
Where you want to
trying?
pick up 3 or 4, you should be
Yes.
picking up. You can, there are 2, 3 references. If you go, there's this book of measures of positive psychology also, where there is a complete chapter on norms of test construction. So even over there, you'll find appropriate reference as to how many parameters to pick, which to pick, and how to pick.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shilpa. We have one more hand raise. Sanya, can you unmute the person?
Ma'am can unmute herself now.
Hello? Hello, can I go ahead? I'm Dr. Nirmala from Chennai. Can I?
Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Good evening, ma'am. Thank you for the inspiring talk. Actually, I'm an administrator and academician retired. I'm interested in just finding out, getting your suggestion regarding the following. One thing, like, have we developed any reliable tests to assess the mental health and also, the well-being of the students in higher educational institutions in the Indian context? Actually, I'm not a psychology student, but I have gone through a few courses and completed successfully. Some of them offered through Coursera and edX, and it is my, lifetime interest also in the field. So I just want to know, like, have we developed any reliable tests which can be applied to the students in higher educational institutions in the Indian context? If so, will you please suggest? Or do you suggest it would be better to have some kind of adaptation? Like, westernized, accepted, established scales are there already. So what is your suggestion, ma'am? Because
Yes, so we have, thank you for your question, Nirmala ji, and we have a lot of scales which have been already adapted for the adolescents in India as well. You also have a lot of South Indian adaptations where you could be using the closest one from Bangalore. So the such as you have mental health continuum scale, which is there, which could be used in higher education setups. Then there is a personal well-being for even college students, which could be used. There are a lot of happiness scales. There are scales on depression, stress, anxiety. Again, DAS 21 has in higher education, college going, university going students, it has been adapted on. So there's a huge list which is there with Indian adaptations. We also have psychological well-being scale, which has an Indian adaptation as well. So yes, there are scales which are already existing, adapted, and they have a good reliability and validity for the Indian population.
thank you. Thank you.
We can take 2 to 3 more questions as we are just approaching the time limit. So if there are any questions, kindly raise your hand and just or either post them in the chat window. All right, ma'am. I also have like one more question. If someone is, if they posted, that's okay. So I have a question related to cross loading. So sometimes you see when you run exploratory factor analysis, and there are certain items which are loaded on maybe 2 factors, and they're highly loaded on both the factors, and like highly loaded on one factor and maybe like loaded a little bit lesser on other factor, and the item is theoretically relevant for you. So in that case, what should we do? So should we accept the item that is it is loading on the higher like loading on the higher side, or what should we do in that case?
So wherever you have the higher loading for EFA, you will put that factor in that EFA itself. But when you will be putting loading, you will do your CFA. there is a likelihood that the CFA will give you a pathway to the factor which had which had a little less loading. So then what you do is you run both of them for your CFA and you see which is going to be a better model fit. And then accordingly you place the factor in that, and you could report it saying that it had two loadings, but when the model fit with this, when the item was reported with this factor, this were the model, these were the factor loadings which came up. However, when we changed the path, these were the loadings, and hence based on the construct validity or the CFA, we would want to consider the factor to be, and we would consider the item to be a part of which unobserved factor, which is there. So you could always change it. There are papers these days who are doing this a lot, Kirti, where you find two, but the item goes best for the construct validity into the weaker one. So then you consider that as an item also.
So, ma'am, are there any references also, like where people cite who people have done certain kind of, they have used methodologies and then they cite their work?
Yes, so you know what, when you will be reading papers on that same scale, you will find these references. So when you do your literature review, it will be very important for you to look into this. So like say strengths and difficulties questionnaire, when we did it for the Indian adolescents while we were adapting it, we did find that a lot of papers were talking of two-factor solution. So when we were looking at development and validation papers of strengths and difficulties, that is how we realized that, oh, why should we also not try it as two-factor solution? Because a lot of people have done the two-factor solution. So when you get into that scale and in the depth of reading it, that's where you will find that what kind of factor solutions have the other people also observed, or what have they reported, and then you would pick up those.
Yeah,
So
ma'am.
there's no one point blanket kind of, I would say, a reference which is there that this is it what you can give. See, earlier Tabnik and Fiddle way back in 2013, 14, 15, Tabnik and Fiddle was something which everyone was quoting when it came down. But today you look at the contemporary research papers, there's no Tabnik and Fiddle is not there so much when you look at cutoffs of CFA. You have new like new researchers who have come up. So obviously this is one area which is developing every day. Like earlier there was no multi-group CFA. You could only report a factor structure and it was considered as a very good piece of work in psychometrics. Today, even like measurement invariance itself has taken a back seat today, because we are not talking of just two groups, but we are looking at three groups, four groups, five groups as measurement invariances in cross-cultural validation papers. So times are changing, and this is one field which has evolved in 1 decade, but leaps and bounds of development has happened. So whenever the key to looking at how do you validate your scale is, you pick up at least 30 to 40 papers, whatever are available in that on that particular scale, and you trace down it to the origin of the scale itself. So that entire trajectory of the scale will let you know where the scale stands today and what more can be done with that scale.
Yes, ma'am. That was actually a great explanation and lot of rich information that I got from the session. And I hope all the audience and even the participants that are here, they have got to know a lot about, not just about what psychological testing is, but how to develop a test. What are the things that you need to be careful while you are, choosing a model, while you're adapting a test, while you're translating a test. So I think we have just approached our time limit, so we don't have much time to have any other questions. So on behalf of team NPPA, I would like to thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your time. Thank you for patiently answering all the questions. The session was truly insightful and pertinent, which focused on a lot of intricacies of testing and its property. And it was wonderful to have you, ma'am, here. So thank you so much, ma'am. Our coordinators, for the audience, our coordinators will be posting a feedback link and some other links. Kindly just check in the chat window, go through the website link, membership link, and you can check the kind of resources. On behalf of Team NPP, I also would like to thank the audience and express our gratitude. They have turned in here, and we hope to see you again for other sessions of NPPA. So stay safe, take care, have a good day. and let's come in for much more sessions that NPA is organizing. So thank you all. You can exit the chat window. Just don't forget to fill in the feedback form. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Kirti. Thank you for the opportunity and giving the platform to actually talk with all young research scholars on test construction and psychometrics, because not a lot of research students actually want to go on this path, So it's a bit challenging. And generally, when you start taking psychology, you pick it because you're scared of numbers. And when you
Right.
land up with psychometrics, where the numbers are in front of you, you can't do anything apart from the numbers. So definitely, that is one thing. I would rather tell all the students, if there are any here, please don't get scared with numbers. They aren't that they aren't so scary when it comes to even psychometrics. It's very easy because there's a lot of softwares these days to do a lot of pluses and minuses. So there's no longer you're doing anything which is by hand. It looks overwhelming, but it's really not that overwhelming. Once you start doing it, you would love to get into psychometrics.
Yes, and it's a very applicable field as well, ma'am. Like how industry is growing, there's a lot of need of psychometricians. Very much applicable
A
field.
lot of times industry uses MBTI. That's their pet scale to use. But if you actually look at it, MBTI is not a valid and reliable scale. You
Right.
cannot establish the validity and reliability. So, for psychologists, it's a scale which cannot be used in research. You will never find any research paper which has used MBTI and given you a correlational analysis with anything.
Yeah, that was actually a good point to get into started with, like for a lot of the scholars, that you need to see whether the test is validated and whether it's has psychometric properties established or not. It's great, ma'am. It was a great session with you.
Thank you, Kirti. Let's meet once